Thank you so much, Anting, for your introduction, and Ray for welcoming me here, and all my friends from Taiwan. I'm very honored to be here with you today. Ray asked me to join 10 days ago, and I said yes, because I was looking forward to finally come and share a little bit about my experience, but most of all to learn from Taiwan. I have a lot of admiration for Ray and Anting, and also many Taiwanese people. My co-founder now is a Taiwanese American, and some of my best friends in the US now are Taiwanese American as well. So I've started to want to come, so this was a good invitation. I also am very honored to see how they have been contributing to their home country. That's something that means a lot. There's nothing more meaningful than using your talents for the people you love, right? And that's something I was very honored to do for Singapore as well in the first part of my career. So today, Ray asked me to talk about talent, culture, and identity in the age of AI. And to do that, I wanted to give you a bit of my perspective, where I came from, what I've done in my life that shapes my perspective on this issue. So in the first chapter of my life is when I met Anting. The Singapore government paid for me to go to Princeton to study, and I went back after that. I had 6 years of government service. They put me in the Ministry of Finance at first, and then they moved me to the Ministry of Education. I worked on preschool policy to make it more equitable. I built a vocational university, and I was chief of staff to the education minister. I wrote his speeches. After that, I set up a strategy team for the Prime Minister, and that's when they started to build the Smart Nation. And I got into the Smart Nation team to deploy technology for public good. And then my husband, who is also Anting's friend from Princeton, wanted to go back to Stanford to do his PhD. And at the time, the Singapore government was looking to set up a global operation to look at attracting technology talent to Singapore. Because in the 2000s to 2010, we lost all the technology talent to Silicon Valley. So they said, okay, can you set this up for us? And I thought I would do it for 6 months, but I ended up doing it for 4 years because it was such an interesting time. It's not just about attracting the talent, it's also about changing the government's policy so that we can bring in the right talent, because government is so bureaucratic, whereas technology talent is so much used to autonomy and skills and building from the bottom up, right? So there was a big culture clash, and I was able to advise the Prime Minister on some of that. And then finally, I decided that I want to learn about technology by actually working in a company. And so I joined a computer vision company. Healthcare computer vision is a type of AI. And grew it, we raised $150 million, and we grew it really quickly. And then I decided that I wanted to build my own company. So right now, I'm working my own company, which looks at supporting women through adversity, because we realized that women trying to stay in the workforce encounter many adversity, and how do you help them get the support of women who have been through that before. So I bring the perspective as somebody who's worked in government, as a mother myself, thinking about how do I prepare my children in this age of AI, and also as a coach. I coach many, many people in Asia and the US on their careers, and I'm realizing there's a lot of anxiety to do with the changing job market. So I'm bringing my perspective from those different experiences. Okay, so I have 2 parts. The first part is really about how do we adapt in this age of AI, which is very different from the industrial age, right? And the second part is why we need to grow deeper roots and really understand who we are in this age of AI. Okay, so I'm going to the first part. The difference between the age of AI versus the industrial age. Someone like me and my parents, we really grew up in the industrial age. That is the post-war period when we're really trying to grow industries and educate our populations en masse, right? Almost 0% education levels, maybe 10% right after the war. How did we manage to make Singapore into such a successful country? We quickly brought in the industries, and we planned ahead, 4 years ahead, all the education, higher education spaces that need to be filled 4 years ahead. And so, as a student then, my parents, the first-generation university students, it makes a lot of sense for them to study very, very hard, try to get into one industry, and then grow the rest of your career in that one company, one industry, right? That is what they grew up with. That is what they grew up telling me to do. But the AI age is so different. When I was in the Ministry of Education in 2013, we were trying to do what Singapore used to do for 50 years. Say what industry is coming in and what how many university spaces do we need to allocate for this industry? But we were so off. We were so off in all our predictions because the new categories of jobs kept coming up, old categories of jobs were disappearing, all within one 4-year university cycle. I'll give you an anecdote. I was in Princeton on Friday, 2 days ago, and a Princeton student actually told me, Princeton degree matters less and less today because all the skills that employers are looking for is online education, right? So he was so nervous. He was trying to get a job and he couldn't get it. And he told me this and I said, oh, that makes a lot of sense. I'll give you another example. My husband, he is a Stanford PhD in AI, okay, AI, the best field. But he went into a company and every 6 months his job changes and they restructure. And he has to learn a whole new part of AI. Isn't that crazy? So even if you get the best education, the best degree, your job is going to change every 6 months. Oh no, not a bad thing, but let me go on to my next slide. So in the past, in the industrial age, you can be very linear in your thinking. You can say, oh, let's hurry up, get the best grades, get the best course, and then reach my destination, and then make a lot of money and retire. But now it's really, really not like that, right? The 3 things I want you to take away is you really need to enjoy the process of discovery. If someone like my husband didn't enjoy, the discovery, he thought, oh, I get my PhD, my life is set, he'll be very depressed now because he finds out that he has to keep on learning, right? Another thing I want to share is that instead of viewing life as a series of tests to pass, you must see it as a series of hypotheses to test, right? In tech, we know about this thing called product market fit, where you're trying to iterate your product to see whether it fits with the market. As a talent in today's world, you have to do that too. What's the market like? What do I like? What am I good at? And you keep trying new things, and you're going to find your way forward. And the most important thing is intrinsic motivation, because what's going to get you up every day when things are changing under your feet so quickly? Why are you going to keep trying, right? So this comic, Asians Not Bisions, is very indicative of my feelings as a parent. I am an Asian mom. I have 2 children, and if I had just listened to myself, I would say, okay, but let my children make a lot of money first. Let them go to law school, medical school first, and then maybe when they're 40 years old, they can do whatever they want, right? And I'll be very angry with this guy. This guy is actually my neighbor in California. His name is Mark Rober. You can look him up on YouTube. He was a NASA engineer, and he decided after that he wanted to spend the rest of his life building gadgets and making mazes for squirrels in his backyard. I'm not kidding. Check him out. After a few years, he became very successful, and now he's a child educator in STEM. But I'll be very angry if he was my son, right? That's my first instinct. However, I think, as I think about it deeper, if I make my children just keep going to jump for external measures of success like money and grades, it actually takes away something from them. It takes away time on them actually finding things that they like and trying it out and finding out what their product market fit is. So my first point is, instead of chasing kids and adults as well to find their final destination and stick to it, we really need to encourage them to try out different ways of being and doing. And I need to give you 2 examples, one for kids, one for adults. For children, university students, one of the most successful programs for Singapore is what we call the NUS Overseas College, where we send them to internships for 6 to 12 months in real startups all over the world. And they work there just like any normal startup person. They pull the hours, they have to live on very little pay. And what happens there is a few of them come back and become the best startup founders, unicorn founders in Southeast Asia. And some of them realize, I never want to work for a startup again. And the outcome is equally good from the student's perspective. Because how do you know unless you try it and actually immerse yourself in it, right? For the Singapore government, I'll give you an example. When I joined the government, it was all about loyalty. You just stay in the government and you stay there until you're 50, and then you maybe become minister, maybe retire, but you just stay in it, don't leave. It has changed so much over the last 10 years. Now they ask everybody, please try and go out and try something else. Because how do we know that you actually want to do this? How do we know that you're actually interested unless you go out and try? So it's transformed, and they want us to do it even younger. And that has trade-offs. It has trade-offs in our leadership pipeline planning, but we're willing to take that trade-off so that we have more motivated workers, right? Another thing here is, instead of avoiding failure, we need to train our students to thrive through failure. And this is where the Silicon Valley does very well. In Silicon Valley, at least until recently, if you start a startup and you fail, the tech companies will still want to hire you, and they may even see that as a good thing that you tried and you took the company to some level of product market fit, because you tried, right? And in the age of AI, it makes a lot more sense to hire somebody who actually was willing to try than was just trying to protect their reputation or their iron rice bowl. And I think that would apply to more and more companies going forward. Another thing I feel very strongly about is for agents, especially for us to be able to have the emotional capacity to cope with failure. Failure is not easy for anybody, but for agents it's especially hard because we have a shame around it, or we tie our whole self-worth to our success, and then if we fail, it's like we're worthless. That's not true, actually. A lot of negative feelings are just something that you learn to work through in life, and a lot of executive leadership that I've found as I coach people is that they're able to feel those negative feelings and move on without just saying, oh, I'm just a terrible person. So that's what I call emotional capacity that we need to train our students in, and ourselves, frankly, in as well. So now that was really about the flexibility, adapting part, and now I want to talk about staying rooted and grounded in the age of AI. And why is this important? Well, it's very important because three things. The first reason is generative AI makes us more productive, so we can do a lot more, but what if we're doing the wrong thing? That's a big question. We might be just going in the wrong direction for ourselves, and that is even more tempting when we can do so much more. The second reason is we might tend to look down on ourselves and not play to our strengths. Especially this might be true for small countries like Singapore. Even Singapore feels like that sometimes, right? I'm going to give you examples on that. Yeah, so I will go into them in order. So in terms of playing to your strength as a small country, there are two things you need to learn. And I want to talk about Singapore's experience. The first one is to learn how to ask the right questions and to cut out the wrong questions. And the second one is really to play to your strengths. And what does it mean to have strength as a small country? Singapore has thought about this a lot, in the government especially. So, what are the wrong questions? Well, I live in Silicon Valley for 7 years, and I have become a de facto tour guide for all the Singapore government officials who come to Silicon Valley. They tell me, oh, Karen, how can we become Silicon Valley? Because everybody likes Silicon Valley. It can make money very fast. It's risk-taking. There's innovation culture. So they always ask me this one question, which I find a very interesting question, but also distracting. Because if you are a change maker, wanting to make a change in your country, the first question is not to look at somebody else, but to really understand the context that you're coming in so that you can marry those two cultures together properly rather than just copy-paste, right? So these are the three questions, right? Where am I from and how has that shaped the cultural psyche that I'm speaking into in Taiwan, in Singapore, when I go out and learn from somebody else? That will inform how you make change and what change you should make. And finally, how do I actually create this unique marriage, one that looks like nobody else's, because nobody else is Taiwan, and nobody else is Singapore, right? So how do we do that? I want to share with you my thoughts about how I think about this in Singapore versus Silicon Valley, and I invite you as Taiwan to think about that for yourself. So when I think about Singapore and Silicon Valley, where do I come from? The context is so different. This is 1960. 1960 Singapore, I think it was 1.3 million out of 1.6 million people didn't have a house, right? We were just trying to survive after the war. In Silicon Valley, I think it was $146 billion in today's dollars going into the NASA space mission, trying to put a man on the moon, which sparked the semiconductor innovation. So while we were built on survival, they were built on discovery, like discovering something never known before, and they started at much richer baseline. So when you look, Singapore, we built our whole society on efficiency, right? We say, okay, how can we put everybody through school, get everybody a job, and get everybody a house within one generation? Everything else no time for risk-taking and discovery, like just get everybody some basic standard of living. Whereas in Silicon Valley, they were like, oh, how might we put a man on the moon? How might we increase computing power? And that was considered a luxury to anybody in post-war Singapore, and probably Taiwan back then as well. Another thing is, we are extremely rules-based society because we were that poor country. Why would any US company or come to put their manufacturing or operations in our country? The only way is to be rules-based and for people to believe that we'll do what we say. So no room for disruption, whereas in Silicon Valley, it's all about, oh, don't tell the government, but we're going to do this first. We're going to put an autonomous vehicle on the road, and then we'll tell them later, right? That's just not possible in Singapore, and it still is not possible to some extent today. So if you start to know the differences in, let's say, Singapore and Taiwan, and Singapore and Silicon Valley, then you can start to create the marriage. For me, one of the ways that I have looked at it here is, okay, Singapore wants innovation, but we need to marry it with equity. Why? Because in Silicon Valley, if people don't succeed, they just move out of this very expensive area. Whereas in Singapore, we look after people in our small country from cradle to grave, which means the cost of living cannot be too high. And this leads us to do many, many things, even as we bring in innovation. We make sure our public housing is affordable. We still have 80% people in public housing. That means our locals are well taken care of. We still manage immigration quite tightly compared to the US. And we do inefficient things like setting aside land for oil and gas, for manufacturing, so that there's a diversity of jobs, because not everybody wants to take high risks. Not everybody is willing to take the Silicon Valley mindset, because we are a very small place. So this is an example of how we marry equity with growth, and it will look very different from Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley people might go to Singapore and say, oh, why are you so slow in some ways, right? Another way is we think about it is, in small countries like Singapore, we really need government to coordinate and steer the country. And that's very different from the US context, where tech and government have a very adversarial relationship. So we do expect our tech entrepreneurs to work very closely with us. We do not take the Silicon Valley approach in this. So these are just examples for you on how we take what we want and we discard the rest when we learn from other countries. So over to you, Taiwan. I know it's not a convenient time to discuss this now. Sometimes when I run these workshops for other countries, we talk about that, right? What is it? Where do you come from? What do you want to preserve? And actually, when you learn from Singapore or Silicon Valley, what do you need to keep? And how will you create your own unique marriage? And these are the questions that we train people to answer when they go out and learn, so that we avoid the copy-paste mentality. So the next part really of playing to your strengths as a small country, this is where Singapore, we know that we are like a little ship in an ocean with many, many big ships. And the world as it is, institutionally, is getting harder and harder for all small countries to play in today's geopolitics, right? But what is the strength of small ships? We steer very fast, we are very resourceful, and we are very flexible. Whereas the big ships, a little thing they do in the institutional landscape affects all of us, but they take a long time to get there. So we know our difference, and we know how to play to it. I want to give you a case study, which is how did Singapore become a tech hub? I promise you, in 2010, we were far from being a tech hub. Actually, our computer science department was only taking in the worst students. C-grade students go to computer science department, and all engineers were going to Silicon Valley because we outsourced all the tech work, and they only did IT management and project management in Singapore. So for 20 years, we lost all our tech talent, and in 10 years, we rebuilt it all again. How did we do it? So this is where small country mentality came in. We said, okay, look at the US and the EU. They're stuck in this adversarial relationship with tech companies, which means they're very compliance-based, right? How have you broken our laws? Please update the laws, wait for us, and tech companies just rolling their eyes and thinking, oh no, we'll get nothing done with these people. As a small country, we realized, okay, we have the flexibility to create spaces in our country where you don't need to keep to our regulations. You can come and build your cryptocurrency, you can come and build your autonomous vehicle. The only obligation is you teach us how to change the law. right? And we dedicate people to really work with these tech companies to update our regulations in these safe places, which meant that a lot of them wanted to come and join us. Why was there autonomous vehicles in Singapore? We had nothing on computer vision at the time, but they came because of these policies that we were able to move very quickly and find our space as a small country. And then after that, all the labs come in, all the research comes in, and we start to build a flywheel around that technology. Another thing for small countries to know is that as the institutional space shrinks for us, the importance of relational space increases. We are very used to thinking structurally, institution to institution, foreign affairs to foreign affairs, but really, Singapore, one thing that I admire about our government is we always know the power of relationships. So I built the Singapore Global, I was part of the team that built the Singapore Global Network in 2018, which is to get in touch with all the alumni of Singapore, Singaporeans living overseas, people who live in Singapore before for postings. Anybody who's ever set foot on Singapore for more than 3 months basically comes into our network, and we discover all of them. Where are they? Where are they in the world now? Actually, which companies are they in, and what influence do they have? So we have this whole team looking at that in all countries of the world. And we also have the counterpart called the Economic Development Board that does this for companies. And what we're able to do there is to use soft influence. If we know their motivation, we know what they're thinking about the company, about their own lives, we know what Singapore wants, which is to have more of their talent here. We find the overlap and we just bring them in. But we wouldn't know that if we just were operating institutionally, right? These are all intelligence things that we do. Not formally, it's not formal intelligence, but the relational networks that you build enable you to do things like this. And as institutional space shrinks, the importance of this is increasing. Okay, this is my final slide. I want to give you an example of how we use that, right? We wanted to become a tech hub, so we thought, okay, we just need to bring in the world's best tech talent at the same time every year. And we used to have these conferences throughout the whole year. January 1 conference, February 1 conference, March 1 conference, and they wouldn't get critical mass. So in the government, we said, okay, FinTech Week is in November, and all the leadership week is in September, and all of you must just do your conferences then, which was very, very effective, because what people in Silicon Valley will tell me is, oh, we don't see each other all year in Silicon Valley, and then we go to Singapore and we see each other there. So Singapore became the meeting place, right, for tech talent, and then we bring them around, we show them all companies, we show them everything, and they start to invest. We create the visas for them. We also engage the diaspora talent to be mentors for our talent in Singapore. So Singaporeans living in London are helping our engineers in Singapore. We create programs for them to spend 6 months with us. We just build all these bridges because we know they're valuable, and we know that that creates space for us in a world where institutional space for countries is shrinking. Okay, this brings me to my last slide, which is really a conclusion. You know, we know the world is changing with AI. We've heard about this. I really enjoyed this morning's session. And we know it's uncertain. We know we have to change, right? We know we have to update our mindsets. But at the same time, I think we need to really lean into who we are, our strengths. And there's many strengths of the Taiwanese people. I'm just constantly impressed, even this morning, at the depth and the thoughtfulness and the leadership of Taiwanese people, including Anting and Ray over here, but many of you here. So just really make sure you lean into that and be clear on the why, and as well as to be playing to your strengths, right, in this time. Let's not be distracted by just becoming more and more productive. Let's make sure it goes towards impact as a country. So yeah, thank you very much for your time. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you, Karen.